I haven't even gotten started yet, and already we have a baby on the lap. Hi, cutie. You want to say hi to the people? No, I didn't think so. She doesn't really like being held, but she does like sitting on laps. I always think it'll be a good idea to set up for these videos in front of this bookshelf so, we get a little topical background. But then I remember that you can't see, like, any books. This is a 6-shelf bookshelf, and the top 2 shelves are filled, and the bottom 2 shelves are filled, but these middle 2 have, that's it. There's, nothing on these shelves, and my plans go to ruin every time because you can't see any books. There's nothing here to see. What are we doing? What should we do? Should we organize the shelves so that you can actually see the books on them? You don't care, do you? It has been a busy few weeks. It has been a while since we've seen each other. Hello. Welcome. My name is Gala. We like to talk about books. If you like talking about books, you have come to the right place. This little lady, she likes talking about books too. She doesn't. Don't let her know what we're doing here. It's fine. We are gathered here today, friends, neighbors, lovers, co-workers, Carmichaels. We are gathered here today to talk about the books that I read in February. This is a little late. I'm sorry about that. It's been a very busy few weeks. I think I've read 50 pages in the month of March. We are, what's today, 9th or 10th? We're like 9 days into the month of March. I've read 50 pages. That's how you know it's a busy month. Nonetheless, we are here today to discuss some books from the month of February. Without further ado, because I'm a rambler, you know that by now if you've been here before, let's just get into it. I lied. I always say, let's just get into it, or let's start this, or let's do this, and then I go for a sip of tea, because that's just who I am, and I'm sorry. And you usually don't see this in the video. Today you might. I might still cut this out, but I've got some peach tea today, and I thought I'd let you know about that. So the first thing I read in February was Yevgeny Onegin by Alexander Pushkin. This was, beautiful. I imagine one or two of you folks who are watching right now have probably read this before. It's fantastic. It is poetry incarnate. This is Pushkin's best-known work. I have not read anything else from him other than a scant few poems here and there. This is my first real full work from him, and I know this took many years of his life to write, and he sort of wrote it intermittently while working on other things. Yeah, I really, really love this. This is about Yevgeny Onegin himself. It's Eugene in the English translation. I refuse to call him that. His name is Yevgeny. I don't care what anyone says. We're not going with Eugene. Eugene. He is kind of a disenchanted socialite who's living a bit of a boring but literary life after he inherits his uncle's estate in the country. A woman named Tatiana comes to fall in love with him. Interesting things ensue. There's a duel. Some people go down. Let's just leave it at that. I would love to talk about this at length in a separate video maybe, so I might keep my thoughts a little bit briefer here. But this is, it's so good. The poetry is it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful. There are different camps on what translations you should read for this, since, he's Russian, of course. I know some folks really swear by the verse translations. I know Nabokov himself did less of a rhyming style translation and did more of a strict, almost prose poem translation, where he goes for the most straightforward and rudimentary translation that he possibly could, while kind of not avoiding the poetry, but sort of allowing the poetry of Pushkin's initial words speak for themselves, and when translated into English, trying to allow that poetry to flow in sort of a different manner than trying to fit things into, his rhyming scheme. He has a really specific style of writing his poetry in this volume. It's called the Pushkinian stanza, or the Pushkin stanza. I don't remember which. And I believe the rhyme scheme is what is it? A B A B C C D D E F F E G G. And yeah, I really like this from a structural standpoint. It is a novel in verse, as Pushkin called it. And I think that makes sense. There's so much poetry, not only to the words and the structure and the style, but there's so much poetry to the character's actions, I feel. Just the way that the character Tanya or Tatiana falls in love with Yevgeny, and the way that Yevgeny reacts to that. There's so much inherent poetry to this world that Pushkin created. It's really, really beautiful. And he sort of plays the characters in a way where Tanya has a certain shift in her personality and her actions, and Yevgeny has a sort of opposite shift where Tanya starts as a love-struck fool and Yevgeny as sort of a disenchanted socialite, and they sort of swap roles over the course of the story. It's very interesting, and it's almost slow but surprising. And from the structural standpoint, again, this is told from the perspective of someone who knows Yevgeny, like, knows the characters, but doesn't really have a hand in the situation. You don't know who the narrator is, and they feel so linked into everything that was going on, but so detached at the same time. There's this whole thing about duels in this book, like a duel play takes place between two different characters, and it's really wild because Pushkin was killed in a duel in real life, and I think Lermontov, the other famous Russian poet, was also killed in a duel, and it's crazy to me because you have all these, like, duels in fiction, and, like, he writes about a duel between two characters, and it goes poorly because, like, it's a duel. People usually die in a duel. Not always, but usually. And he dies in the same way. It's like a weird foreshadowing of his own death. And it's like, you can't say he saw it coming, but he participated in quite a few duels in his lifetime. And he ended up dying in one. It's just, what the hell, dude? Like, you write about you write about these characters, like, in a stupid situation where, like, they shouldn't really be dueling, and, like, neither of them has the true animosity to go through with the duel, but they go through with it nonetheless, and someone dies for it, and it's like, you let that happen in your own life? What? Come on, seriously? Ah, God, I don't even know. And I think this is the first time I've really tried to be deliberate in the way that I structure the notation and note-taking for my, like, you know, annotations and tabs. Usually I just pick whichever color looks prettiest against the cover of the book. That's seriously how I've done it for years, and I'm trying to be more deliberate with it now. So I tried to just make a basic, like, little scheme for myself of how I'm gonna use these colors to mean different things in the structuring, and I'm trying to follow through with that now in everything I read. Some things, you know, this structure doesn't really, like, apply, and I'll just use, like, one color and it doesn't really matter, but I'm trying to stick more to this color scheme because I think it's going to help me going forward in using books and, like, returning to books as resources to be able to say, oh, I know these yellow tabs are all about, like, the structure of the book and how the book is actually composed, and if I'm interested in going back to that sort of thing, I can just go to the yellow tabs. So what a concept that the colors can actually mean different things. I'm probably the last human on earth to use these things to actually realize you should be doing them, but here we are. You know, we're finally there. We made it. Better late than never. Next up, in the month of February, I read Bird by Bird by Lamott. And typically after I finish reading a book, I'll just write a page in a notebook, kind of summarizing my thoughts. Usually just write a page. Sometimes if I have more to say, it'll be more than a page. This page is kind of just slander. It's harsh to say that. I did not like this book really one bit, and I'm going to avoid going back through my notes to talk about this one because I think I probably remember enough of what I want to say here. So the subtitle for this book is Some Instructions on Writing and Life. This book is essentially Anne Lamott talking about her experience as a writer over her several decades in her career and how she can try and basically help other folks to learn to write better and, you know, get better into the flow and the process of writing. I'm slowly trying to work on my own writing in different ways. I'm doing a lot of study and research and reading right now, so I figured something like this might not be bad. I had it on the shelf for maybe like a year now, and I figured I'd just pick it up and see if it was at all useful to me. It was, but not in a positive way. This is really more about some instructions on life than some instructions on writing, because this book is not like practical tips on like how to get into the flow and like be more successful as a writer. This is Anne Lamott lamenting the hardships of being a writer for like 200 pages and anecdotally trying to like ham-fist methods and tactics for like getting better at writing, and I don't think it works. Like there are multiple practical pieces of advice in here. I'll be fair in that sense, and maybe these things did not speak to me or appeal to me or work for me in any way just because they seem so rudimentary to the point where like anybody could think of them. But maybe to the book's credit, like I just know these things and other people wouldn't know them if they've never tried them before. So I will be fair there. Like she talks about how she runs writing classes and how the people in those classes constantly just ask her, how do we get published? How long does it take to get published? And she spends a lot of time in this book debunking like the myth of the grandeur of publishing. And you know, that's probably useful to a lot of folks, but personally, I'm not really thinking about getting published. I'm just thinking about writing the thing that I want to write, and I know it's going to take quite a lot of time to get better at what I do and do the work, you know, to get to that point. So publishing is not on my mind, and she spends so much time in here debunking that myth of publishing and talking about how all anyone ever wants to do is get published. And again, I'm sure that's useful to some people, but she has practical advice of like, write letters, write on index cards, you know, how to work through like writer's block, what writer's block really means, having false starts in your writing. Again, I feel like these are actionable, valuable things to consider, but the way she writes it feels so unhelpful. Like, half of the book is just her complaining about how hard it is to be a writer and talking about how her mental illness makes it difficult to write. It was hard to get anyone to say anything that would make the jealousy go away or change into something else. I felt like a wicked stepsister in a fairy tale. I told another friend, and she read me some lines by a Lakota Sioux. Sometimes I go about pitying myself, and all the while I am being carried on great across the great winds in the sky. That is so beautiful, I said, and I am so mentally ill. Why do we need to know that? I don't get it. Like, why do we need to know you're mentally ill? What does that have to do with writing? What does that have to do with anything? Half the book is just her talking about feeling mentally ill and how if she doesn't write, she will herself. Okay, I don't know how this is actionable writing advice, and I really wish you kind of kept those things to yourself, because this book feels more like her getting things off her chest and venting about how hard it is for her to write books instead of actually giving actionable advice. I would not recommend this to anyone trying to improve their writing. This is not a useful book. This is just Anne Lamott talking about writing. It's not valuable information on improving your process of writing. It's Anne Lamott talking about how hard writing is and how you shouldn't think about getting published. The latter of those points is probably pretty useful to most people, but please don't pick this up. I would probably say pick up any other book on writing before this. I haven't really read any, but I have to imagine they're probably all better than this book. The follow-up book there, for me, was Ford Madox Ford's The Good Soldier. Oh, where to begin with this? I liked this so much more than I thought I was going to. The introduction to this book, or the preface, felt like it was almost like filleting the book too much in a way where I felt like it wasn't going to live up to the hype of what the introducer was saying, but it really did. Oh my gosh, this was so good. I feel like I need to make a whole video just talking about this one too. So I had never read Ford Madox Ford before. The only thing I actually knew about him was an essay I read in A.S. Bayot's Passions of the Mind. She writes an essay about Ford, and I remember thinking, this guy sounds really good, like I should read him. But I didn't really know anything about him, and after reading this, I really want to go back and read that essay to kind of see what she was talking about and see if I can understand it a little bit better, because I think a lot of the essay actually just flew over my head because I didn't know the writer at all. But this is about basically just English socialites in unhappy marriages. This is told from the perspective of a character named Dowell, who simultaneously is intrinsically linked to the events of all of the characters in the book, but at the same time feels detached in the way that he recounts the story. A lot of the information that he has actually comes secondhand because he wasn't there for all of the events that he's describing, but he's so linked to all of the characters in these events. Like, it's his wife and the other married couple that they're friends with, and he's such an interesting and reliable yet unreliable narrator in the sense that we can trust what he says, but he basically tells us subjective and objective events and always tells us, make of this what you will, in this really peculiar way where we actually learn the events of the story through his perspective of kind of learning them himself. He gets, like I said, he gets told a lot of the things that happen without living them himself, and this book is almost like his narration processing all of the things that happened. It's very interesting, and as a narrator, he really works through like this cyclical mode of how he feels about the different characters in the book. Like, there's a character who at the start, he hates him, and then at the end he says he admires him and he's one of the only people he truly loves. Or like his wife, he talks about his wife endearingly, but also explains how she's like a terrible person at the same time. It's beautiful, and I'm trying to keep this brief because I think I just have so much to say about this book that I may want to talk about it separately at a separate point, or like talk about novels of this genre maybe in a separate video. But I also really like the way this book plays with religion and faith and how they can be both detractors in a relationship and the things that ground us at the same time. There are several characters in the book who, because of their faith, will or won't make certain actions, and their actions are limited by their faith in very, very cool ways, where characters are just really torturing themselves because their faith says they have to do things one way and other characters feel differently. And this book is all about, you know, relationships, and it's all about how these characters are treating and mistreating each other and how they affect each other's lives through their different faiths. It's just this really beautiful take on power plays and how different people in romantic relationships treat each other and how they almost support each other's faults. I think there's so much I could say about this. I could probably talk about this for like 20 minutes straight. I'm gonna leave it there because I know I've already said a lot. Such a good book though, so good. Next up, I read On James Baldwin by Colm Tóibín. This was so good. I mentioned this recently in a book haul video I made last month. I really, really like Baldwin, and I haven't read enough of him. And I had never read Colm Tóibín before, but I know his name. He's got a couple of pretty famous novels, if I remember correctly. So this is basically Tóibín talking about his relationship to Baldwin's writing and how Baldwin's writing sort of affected his life and his work, but more than that, it's very autobiographical of Baldwin. And he speaks through primarily like 3 of his works. He speaks through Goat Out on the Mountain, Giovanni's Room, and Another Country. And he does talk about other short stories and other works in there as well as Baldwin's political career and his activism and a whole bunch of other stuff. This was really good. It's not a very long read. I grabbed this from the University of Chicago book sale, which I linked in another video. I can link it again down below though, because the sale is huge and there's so much good stuff that you can check out on there. Highly recommend going to look at that because it's like it's like hundreds of books, and the sale goes for like 6 months of the year. So it's like half the year, half the catalog is on sale. So definitely check that out if you haven't. But yeah, I really enjoyed this as kind of learning more about Baldwin's life, getting me to really want to read more of his writing as well, and just getting more into the psyche of Baldwin. And it really talks about his approach and how unique his approach was and how rigorous his approach was to both his prose and his nonfiction, like his essay work or his speeches or the other things he wrote, and how writers like him or Joan Didion or several others that he mentions in the book, these writers who you could argue that they were predominantly essayists, or you could argue they were predominantly prose writers. And Tóibín really talks about how it doesn't matter because these people were just writers doing the work, and you can see the essayistic quality in the prose and you can see the prose quality in the essays. And I think that makes a lot of sense, and I just really appreciate the way he dives into Baldwin, because it's not just autobiographical. It talks about his activism. It talks about how his activism shaped his prose, how his fiction shaped his activism, and how he really posed himself as a public figure, how his, you know, like, sort of disclosed but undisclosed homosexuality was prevalent in his life and his work. It's really good. Like, I think there's more to talk about here, but I think I'm going to leave it there. And this is jumping ahead, 2 books ahead. I read a couple other things in between, but I also read The American Dream is at the Expense of the American Negro. And this is a short piece of writing that Baldwin wrote in 1965. It's a speech he delivered in 1965. And I know I showed off these little Eris gems in another video, but look at how beautiful the author photos are on the back. Just gorgeous. Yeah, this was good too. It's just a short speech from him, and the title kind of says it all. I don't have much to say about this. It's good to read more of his nonfiction work, and this really talks about the labor of the Black experience and how the Black experience is shaped by the concept of the American dream, and how the concept of the American dream is shaped by the Black experience. And he talks about the difference in the American dream for Black Americans, white Americans, how those two things don't really connect, but at the same time shape each other so intrinsically that it's really, really interesting. I recommend giving this a read. I bought a physical copy for a couple bucks, but you can probably just find this in a PDF online if I had to guess. This is definitely worth a read. It's a really straightforward, uncomplicated, beautiful look into Baldwin's mind. And I think that's one of my favorite things about his writing is just, he's so accessible. He talks about such intense and heavy and important things like race struggles and the Black experience and the gay experience and like political things. Like there's so much going on in all of his work and like what it means to be an artist. Like there's so much stuff there, but it's always so digestible. It's always so accessible. All of his fiction, all of his nonfiction, even the writing about him, like everything I've read from him or about him just feels so accessible in a way where like you feel what he's saying, you understand what he's saying, and you feel like you can really access what he's saying in a meaningful way. Yeah, I don't know. There's just so much beauty to his writing. If you've never read anything of James Baldwin, what are you doing? Like, go pick up literally anything. Go find this PDF online. I think it's a good place to start to understand his political views and how he felt about it, and even just the writing, the prose in this being a delivered speech. It's slightly different than he would obviously write his fiction, but there's still so much like poeticism to his writing. Like a sort of like muted poeticism is kind of the best way I'd describe Baldwin's writing. I don't know. It's gorgeous. Just go check it out. And so returning back to our chronology, I had read Black Talk by Ben Sidran. I recently picked this up at a Goodwill for like $1 or $2. I wasn't in love with this book. This is basically Sidran talking about how black music shapes black culture in America, and how black culture shapes black music in America, and how black music in America is really like a method of communication and a language in and of itself. And predominantly the focus here is how black music is an oral tradition in black culture, how white culture in America is predominantly a written tradition through books and media of that sort, and the black oral tradition being one of musicality and being one of the voice and the instrument as an extension of the body to communicate, is predominantly that form of communication. And I think this was written in roughly like 1970. So it's dated, of course, in what it wants to say, and there's probably a lot more research that's been done on this and a lot more writing that's been done on this in the last like 50 years. I will say it wasn't a very enthralling read. I wasn't super engaged. I was kind of falling asleep on the couch trying to keep up with this book. But there were a couple of really interesting points. I don't think the writing itself was all that incredible, but I do think on a technical level, Ben Sidran is a halfway decent writer. I don't know how much more he wrote besides this book. And as far as, you know, that thesis statement goes, I think talking about black culture as an oral culture and from that an extension like being music, like, and being jazz and bebop and R&B, and that's what he's predominantly focusing on. It is a music-based book in that way. It's a really interesting idea, and he had a couple of really cool points in here. But I think on the whole, it maybe goes on a little bit too long. I definitely learned some things about the history of music. I'm a jazz person myself. I listen to a lot of jazz and R&B. But even from that angle, there's not that much history in here to learn. Like, there's some. It's really more on that technical side of things, of black music and black culture as an oral culture. And I like that. And there's an inherent paradox in the fact that we're reading a book about it, and he actually addresses that in, I think, the introduction. I don't know. I can't say that I would recommend picking this up. It's not like a huge necessary read. I think it says what it wants to say a bit slowly and a little bit too drawn out, but what it has to say is interesting. I just don't know that this was necessarily like a worthwhile read for like the 200 some odd pages that it is. Next up, I had read Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited. And before I go anywhere with this book, I have to say a big thank you to John David. His YouTube handle is Nicholas of Autrecourt. I can link him down below. I had showed this book off in a book haul video last month, and he left a comment for me saying, definitely check this out soon. I think you'd really like it. John, thank you so much. You were so right. You have no idea. This is probably my favorite book I've read so far in this year. Holy smokes. This is just incredible. Oh my gosh. And also I really like this cute illustration on the cover. And I think it actually speaks a lot to some of the themes in the book. Ironically enough, you don't realize it when you're just looking at the cover for the first time. So this is about a man named Charles, and we are following his recollection and reminiscence about his time spent at Brideshead Manor, a manor in the English countryside, where basically this family, I think they're the Marchmain family, he spent a lot of time with different members of this family, and he's revisiting his time at this manor in a reminiscent sense, but also the book kicks off with an opening scene of him in an army regiment in World War II, actually like going back to this manor when it is no longer occupied, and that kicks off his reminiscence, and the reminiscence takes up the bulk of the book. This is so beautiful on so many levels. I could not put this down. I ate this up so fast. I think I read like 150, 200 pages of this in one sitting in one night because I just couldn't stop. At like putting all of my other responsibilities to the side just to read this book, because it was so enthralling. I couldn't stop reading it. I think on a technical level, there's nothing crazy to say about, oh, hear the book cracking. That's not good. I'm gonna close that back up for now. I think on a technical level, there's nothing huge to say about Waugh's prose, which, side note, I learned from looking up Evelyn Waugh. Evelyn Waugh is a man. I think his wife's name was also Evelyn Waugh. this is a book about what it means to fall in love with a person, what it means to fall in love with a place, what it means to fall in love with a period of time and a place that you can't get back, and how reminiscence plays into all of this. And similarly to what I was saying about The Good Soldier, there's actually, again, a central theme here of how faith and religion shape our decisions and our relationships. And there are multiple characters, again, in this book where the way they think and the way they feel are very heavily and directly influenced by their religion or by their faith, and they make or don't make certain decisions based on that faith. And there are certain personal struggles and character struggles thereupon, and like characters who are in love or in a family who like change or break relationships based on their feelings on faith. It's such an interesting idea, and it's only the tip of the iceberg because this book is doing like so many things. Like it's one of those books where I got to the end and I read the final page and I had like a chill. I just, and that doesn't always happen. Even for like a really good book, I don't always get that feeling. But I read the last page of this book and just, it's almost like you don't know what to do with yourself in a certain sense. And I had to just reread the last page like 5 times in a row because I couldn't, like, gosh, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to spoil this book unless I like, maybe I'll make a separate video and really, really dig into all the things I want to say about this, because I think there's just too much to say for one, reading wrap-up video like this. I was just so in love with this, but it also talks about what it means to create, why we create, like how our sense and method and mode of creation relates to our relationships, how we love and lose and forget and regain people in our lives. And it really talks about the soul of a place and the death of a place and how that place can live or die in our memory and not just in physical space. And the main character, Charles, becomes an architectural painter, basically. He paints and draws beautiful manors in the English countryside as they become derelict. And gosh, there's just so much to say about this book. I gotta make a separate video about this. I can't go on forever, but I love this book so much. I think this is quickly become maybe just a favorite book and something I'm gonna reread over and over and over again. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. I think stay tuned. I'm gonna make a separate video about this and really talk about this at length. Maybe I'll tie this into a larger discussion about other works of this kind, like The Good Soldier and maybe some other things. Let me know in the comments below, because I've been short on time recently, and March is going to be a really busy month for me trying to wrap up other work that I have to get done outside of doing this fun Talk About Books YouTube thing. Once that work is sort of more done by the end of March, I'm hoping to have more time to spend to make videos like this. And one thing I really want to do is make more analytical videos, or like spend a video talking about one specific book and really give it the time, and maybe get into like the themes of that book, or make a video surrounding the themes of a couple different related works. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you'd be interested in seeing from me, because I'd really like to know going forward. I think it could be interesting to plan out more things like this, and it's so hard to keep on top of because I read a fair bit. I'll read like 5 to 10 books per month, more or less depending on how much other stuff I have to get done. So when it comes to making a video like a reading wrap-up like this, I think there's value in doing this video, right? So that I can kind of even just minimally talk about the things I've read, and then if I don't have as much time, maybe I can get into something later and talk about this next month or later on down the line if I have an idea for it. It's hard to stay on top of it because if you've watched any of my videos by now, you kind of know I'm a little bit of a rambler. I have a lot to say, and I think that when I get going, it's just really easy for me to keep talking and talking and talking, because when I plan out to sit down for one of these videos, I say, okay, I read 9 books this month. Like, I roughly know what I'm going to say. I'll look at my notes and just kind of piece together my thoughts as I go. I don't write scripts for these or anything. I just don't have the time. I always have more to say than I think I'm going to say. Like, my last reading wrap-up for January, I think it was almost an hour long, and I only talked about 7 books. Like, I went on for like twice as long as I thought I was going to, because I just always find more to say than I think I'm going to say. And I enjoy making these reading wrap-ups, but I think going forward, I may actually want to keep these reading wrap-ups shorter and go into individual videos to talk about, let's say like a book in particular, or like a theme spread out over books, or talk about a genre or a writer. I think I want to get more into more topical videos like that instead of these reading wrap-ups. And I don't think these will go away. I think I'd like to continue doing them, but just kind of hone them down to synopses, maybe more of like getting into the bare bones of the book and really just giving a structure to the video and saving deeper stuff for their own videos. Like, I'm thinking that's what I want to do. So if you have any thoughts, please let me know. I would love to hear what you have to say as well, just as I go forward and try and structure this stuff out, because it's been a couple of weeks since I've gotten to make a video and just sit down for it, and I'm really having fun filming again. I'm just getting back into the swing of things, so I've missed this and I'd like to do this more. So please let me know once again what you might want to see from me for future stuff. And I wrapped up the month of February with 2 books from Vladimir Nabokov. That was Pale Fire and Mary, and both of these are rereads for me. Mary is actually his first published work of fiction, and Pale Fire was one of his last. This was in, I want to say 1965, 1967, and he only had like 2 or 3 works after Pale Fire came out, so they're very much at opposite ends of his oeuvre. I think I'll talk about Mary first. Like I said, these were both rereads for me. This is a very short and sweet little book. It's only like 120 pages or something like that. I think I really enjoyed rereading this because of its simplicity. If you've ever read Vladimir Nabokov before, he is just a prose genius. He's so well known for books like Pale Fire or Lolita and a couple of others, and he's best known for a lot of those books later in his career. He started his career writing in Russian, and he wrote like, I want to say like 20 plus books in Russian before he started writing in English in the first place and working out his other translations from Russian to English and vice versa. So most people would know him for his later works. And I think there's a lot of structural beauty in a lot of his later works, but taking a look at something like just his first book, and again, this was a reread. I read this last year. I read both of these last year, actually, and I just wanted to pick them both up again for the end of the month. As his first book, it's still really good, and it's just about a man named Lev Glebovich Ganin, who is staying in a boarding house for Russian emigres in, I think they're in Berlin. They're somewhere in Germany, I'm pretty sure. And it's just about like this group of about a half dozen, 6 or 7 Russian characters in this boarding house and what their lives are like there, why they're there, what they're doing with their time. And the book starts delving into this reminiscence from that main character, Ganin, into recollections of his time with this young woman named Mary and their relationship. I don't want to spoil anything beyond that. It is a really short book. You could read this in a day. You could read this in a sitting. It's just over 100 pages. If you've read Nabokov before, if you've read something like Pale Fire or any of his other really well-known works, I would say this is worth giving a try. I think anything from Nabokov is worth giving a try because he's just such a good writer. It's really cool to see where he started, you know, and where his fiction and his prose really got going. I know he had published a couple of short stories in like Russian papers and maybe like German and French papers, because he lived in like, he went to Cambridge and then he lived in like Paris and Berlin as well. So I'm not sure exactly where he was living when he wrote this book. I think it was in Berlin, which makes sense, topical to the setting. But yeah, it's cool seeing his earlier work and you know, if you've read him before, you kind of know his style of writing is very similar between all the books, even though he writes about different things. Like, this book it feels like a template for everything that comes later. Like, you can see his you know, typical themes of like identity and self and like dualism in the self and reminiscence and recollection on relationships and events. Reminiscence and recollections from events and relationships from one's past, and how narration can be unreliable, how characters can be unreliable. Like, the main character in this book, Lev Glebovich Ganin, he just casually mentions in one scene in the latter portion of the book, like, he's talking to another one of the boarding house members, one of the Russians, and he's this older poet named Podyagin, and Podyagin is talking about Ganin's name and like his identity, and they're talking about identity and how being an emigre is difficult. And Ganin, the main character, just casually mentions like, Ganin's not my real name. I have a fake passport. And Podyagin, the poet, is like, what? And he doesn't say anymore. Like, we don't learn his real name. Lev is his real name, but his surname is not actually Ganin. And like, we're just told that's not his real surname, but like, he doesn't tell us what his real surname is. And it's little decisions like that seem minor, but I really appreciate and value in Nabokov's writing, where he takes this fact of like false identity or like mistaken identity, and like he just casually tells both the character in the scene and the reader, like, your main character is not who you think he is. You don't know him, and you won't know him, and you have to accept that, and you still have to read this book through the truth and the lens of the character's recollections, because, you know, Ganin's recollections are both real and like palpable and visible to the reader, but they also feel idealized, and that's intentional. And I just really like this balance of sort of like fact and fiction, almost, in a way. That's a recurring thing in a lot of Nabokov's writing, and I will certainly talk about that here. Fact and fiction, and like what is real for the reader, what is real for the characters, what's a lie. Can you even tell when something is a lie as the person reading this book? How reliable are the narrators? So this is told from a third person, and a lot of his books are told from a first person perspective, but I really, really like this as a kickoff to his writing. If you haven't read any of Nabokov's earlier work, I think this is a solid place to start. It probably won't be your favorite, but it's still a good book, and it's so short and so digestible that I think it's a really, really solid pick. And moving on to Pale Fire, this is, again, a reread for me. I read this for the first time last year. It's a masterpiece. I don't even know what else to say. Gosh, it's such a facetious book. Structurally, it's one of the finest things I think I've ever read, and anyone who's read that probably knows what I'm talking about. On a very simple level, it opens up with a foreword about a epic poem written in 4 cantos by the legendary poet John Shade. If you've never heard of John Shade, that's okay, because he's not a real person. You then get to read his poem. Then the bulk of the book, about 250 pages of this book, is a commentary told in footnotes on the poem. And that's it. It's they call it a novel of exhaustion, I believe. A novel that is fed up and bored with the traditional style of writing a novel. So it takes that idea and it explodes it and puts the pieces back together in such an interesting way. And you're learning about John Shade, of course. He's the poet who wrote the poem, but the commentary told on the poem is from the perspective of his friend, Charles Kimboat. And I don't want to say too much. This novel kind of has to be gone into blind. Like, even knowing the structure is almost a bit of a spoiler. The structure is unlike anything you've probably ever read before. The twists and turns are so unique. The way the commentary on the poem evolves and devolves in like importance and relevance and layers of different characters doing different things. It's beautiful. Like, I read this book last year, less than a year ago, and reading it again now, it feels like a whole new book. And it's not like I forgot it. Like, I knew the events of the book, but it's so rich. There's so much to think about and talk about, not just in the structure, but in like every little piece of the information that you learn. There's so much beauty here. I would highly recommend picking this up, but I would say I don't think you should pick this up as your first Nabokov. I think it's challenging. It's a tough book, and rereading it has really cemented my understanding of it a lot better, but also showed me how much I missed on the first read, and I'm sure I'm going to feel that same way on every subsequent read of Pale Fire. So I would say don't pick this up as your first Nabokov. There are a lot of decent places to start. The Lucent Defense is a good place to start. Lolita, it is a good place to start because it's a really good book. Pick this up after a couple of other Nabokovs, but definitely pick it up. It's fantastic. If you're looking for something that just blows the traditional structure of a novel out of the water, which is what I like, definitely go for this. And I've been getting a lot of recommendations and new things to pick up based on this book, and I'm very excited because Nabokov and this book and the literature of exhaustion are really big inspirations for me in the writing project that I'm kind of working on right now. So rereading this was really good, and reading more Nabokov is really good because the way he structures his books is just, it's very inspiring to me, and he's doing a lot of things that I'm very interested in doing myself. So again, if you have any interest, fantastic. And that, my friends, is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for stopping by. I think this video is probably going to end up being shorter than my January reading wrap-up, despite having more books to talk about. But like I said earlier, I think I'm going to try and cut down on the runtime of these and keep them a little more poignant and work in other videos about specific reads and things that I really want to talk about. So like I said earlier, please let me know in the comments below if you have any recommendations, any thoughts, anything you want to share. Tell me about your favorite book. Tell me about your cat. Tell me about what you had for dinner on Wednesday night. Tell me your favorite kind of tea. Do you listen to NPR? I used to, but I don't really anymore. I want to know. Thank you very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Being here with you means the world to me. Talking about books, it's my favorite thing. I should really fix these shelves so you actually have something to look at instead of like a lemon and a feather in a jar. Like, do you like that? Maybe I should get more lemons and feathers in jars. This is going on for way too long. Thank you very much for stopping by. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.